a little bit of math before we get started this morning. All right, we rolling? Great. Then I would ask that each of you would please give us a 2-minute introduction. Tell us who you are, what you've done, and why are you running for office. We'll start with the incumbent.
Great. So Mike Schmidt, incumbent, Multnomah County District Attorney. Started my career as a high school teacher in New Orleans. I've done a lot of things since then. I was an intern in the office, deputy DA, worked in the legislature as counsel for Senate and House Judiciary Committees, ran a state agency for 6 years, the Criminal Justice Commission. Ran in 2020, was overwhelmingly elected in Multnomah County, endorsed by the Willamette Week, which I appreciate, on a reform platform, and got started at about the best time ever to become District Attorney of Multnomah County. It's been a challenging 3.5 years as we've navigated the pandemic, an increase in gun violence, a spike in other types of crimes. But I'm very proud of the work that the office has done and partnering with our law enforcement partners to work on all those issues. With gun violence, we've created a homicide unit, partnered with OHSU to study gun violence so we can get some policy recommendations about our community, auto theft, retail theft. We've formed task forces. We're seeing gains in all those places. In 2023, across the board, we're seeing crime coming back down. So I think we've done a lot of good things, and there's a lot more work to continue to do. So that's why I'm running again, to continue working on the challenges facing this community, the community that I live in, I love. My kids are here, and just want to see Portland thrive.
Dan?
Great. Well, again, my name is Nathan Vasquez. A little bit about my background. I grew up in a small town in Northern California. I'm the grandson of a Mexican immigrant. It's something that is very important and core to my values is that my grandfather grew up on the streets of San Francisco, and he put himself through medical school and became a community doctor. And that example was one of service to the community and to our fellows community members. I got to watch that growing up. It was imprinted on me very early. He told me very directly that as he helped pay my way through college, that he expected me to serve my community as well. And so it's been a lifelong journey for me. When I came up here in 1998 to go to law school at Lewis and Clark, I fell in love with an amazing city, and I really enjoyed all the different neighborhoods and different communities within the city, and it felt so welcoming and safe. I was fortunate that in 2000 I got an internship under Mike Shrunk, and at that point, I really felt like kind of that a core value of serving others came together, because when I went into the office, the motto was do the right thing for the right reasons. And I got to see some amazing examples of people serving the community. And for me, I would get there before 7 a.m. sometimes and then leave late at night. And I loved every second of it. It really spoke to me because I got to speak from the heart for victims in the community. I got to do, from there, I never left. I've been a prosecutor at the Multnomah County DA's office, now in my 24th year. I've had an opportunity to serve our community in just about every capacity, whether it's prosecuting child abuse, doing domestic violence law, robberies, and in the last 10 plus years, I've only handled kind of the most serious complex cases. I'm the only candidate before you that's done that type of work, that's actually prosecuted murder cases, that's actually prosecuted robbery cases, that's actually handled sexual assault cases. And it's something that is a core part of who I am, is serving the community and the victims. I'm here quite simply because the last 4 years, both internally in the office and then externally, have not gone well. To be clear, crime in our community has been out of control. We've seen a loss of accountability throughout our community. At times, people, and what I see is a feeling of, it feels like there's no rules in Portland. And sadly, it's because of failed policies and bad decisions by the elected DA. And those have also wildly hurt us internally. We've seen attorneys leaving the office at record rates. We have seen gender discrimination claims, multiple. I believe we're currently at 3. We've seen, repeated claims of just, a terrible workplace environment. And it hurts community safety when you don't have a healthy functioning office. I am proud that the attorneys, after hearing from both of us, did vote to endorse me, because I think it speaks volumes that they're ready for change. This community is ready for change. And I'm ready to deliver that with some very specific ideas and a new direction, particularly with the idea of bringing strategic prosecution to the entire office.
We'll get to those ideas in a minute. I want to
Yeah.
drill down on a second on this concept that crime is out of control.
Yeah.
I don't think the statistics support that, and what I see on the streets of Portland doesn't support that. Where are you getting that concept?
Well, if you look at our historical rates versus what we have been at, we do see crime at a much higher rate. And we look at just some easy examples are the homicide rate. I mean, throughout my career, we would have 20, maybe 30 homicides a year, which I still believe is far too many. But during, Mike Schmidt's time, we've seen record homicides, as many as 100. This year alone, I think we're at around 24. So that's higher than last year when we were at the same time period, and makes us the leading city on the West Coast per capita. We have more homicides than San Francisco and Seattle combined, total homicides. That's not a good place to be. We've seen that kind of throughout the different areas of crime. We've seen that growth, and certainly compared to before Mike Schmidt and to where we are now, the crime rates are still, significantly, substantially higher. And what I hear from community members, whether it's the everyday business owner or the everyday person that's struggling with, being houseless on the street, is that they don't feel safe. The houseless population have been victimized horribly during this time. We've seen, records of gun violence and serious violence like stabbings. And we've just seen kind of time and time again. And this is, I don't agree that that we're somehow in a safer, better place under Mike Schmidt.
So
And how much of, sorry, can I add one?
Yeah.
How much of that is Mike's fault? I mean, homicides, like it seems like what you're talking about is sure high crime rates, but I mean where the DA comes in is prosecution.
Yep.
So can you talk about prosecution rates versus the actual crime rates? Because it seems like that's maybe a more applicable thing to look at.
Yeah, I mean, is everything Mike Schmidt's fault? No, it's not. But is there
Congratulations for that.
Just most.
Yeah. I mean, is there a complete lack of leadership? Yes, there's a lot of leadership areas that are lacking. There's some very direct failed policies. I think his very direct and ardent support of Measure 110 pushed us in the wrong direction. It led to wild open air drug use and just kind of open air drug dealing. He was a huge proponent of that. Also, when you talk about other failed policies, his massive support for Senate Bill 48, which changed our bail laws, created massive loopholes where we're seeing people in and out of custody all the time. And it's easy to sit back and point the fingers and say there's these other system partners or other things that could be the problem. But when you're the elected DA, the question is, are you pushing us in the right direction or the wrong direction? And what we've seen is multiple examples where he's pushing us in the wrong direction. And when you talk about issuing rates, I want to dig into that. I've heard the elected DA say multiple times things like, well, it's kind of, he uses a very terrible sports analogy, which is, baseball. He says, the police are the pitchers and I'm the catchers and I can just take what they give me. And if you are actually, that very passive approach, I think is wildly misses the mark, because a leader actually recognizes where we're struggling as a community and gets out and works with police ahead of time and does things, not gets dragged on, to things like the auto theft task force as a prime example. We were suffering greatly from auto theft. It was East Precinct officers who developed that. It was East Precinct officers who actually brought that to the office and said, hey, guess what? We're doing this work. Maybe you should come along. We should be well, we disagree on that, and I'm happy if any of you want to go talk to those East Precinct officers. I remember when they created the program, and I remember when they brought it to us. And so, these are, a plethora of issues. And, in citing the issuance rate, that doesn't at all get to the underlying issue, which is this. It's a matter of how many cases where we are serving victims. We have went down dramatically from where we were before Mike Schmidt, and we're not serving victims in the community the same.
I want you to have a chance to respond to all of that, but let's try to narrow it down to something.
Thanks.
Such as, where do we start here? Is crime out of control in the city of Portland?
No. No, and the facts bear that out, the statistics bear that out. We went through a big spike during the pandemic, like cities across the country. Nathan likes to say, oh, because of Mike Schmidt, because of Mike Schmidt. He's leaving out a massive societal disruption that was generational. Like, there were lots of things that have been really challenging over this pandemic, but it hasn't have anything to do with my policies. And when you ask exactly, well, how did those policies tie to anything? He can't answer that question because there are no ties between the homicide rate and my policies. So is crime out of control? Homicides are still way too high. That is absolutely true. We are still higher than we were pre-pandemic. But if you look at other rates of crimes, auto theft, for example, we're below where we were pre-pandemic. So, I mean, you got to look at it category by category, and then what was the response to that specific type of crime? What happened, and where has it gone since then? And so we can, go crime type by crime type. So homicides, still too high. We're working on that. We're working with police officers. We're working with the violence interrupters. The cities, both Gresham and Portland, have made major investments into those community groups, and those are showing good outcomes. Obviously we're doing our side in terms of prosecution. I've reorganized the office to have a homicide unit for the first time, so we now have 7 of our most experienced attorneys working just on those cases so that they can focus on those things. We're also partnering with OHSU for the first time ever to study gun violence specifically in Multnomah County, and they're working on developing recommendations for policy leaders in our community and at our state. With the epidemiological health approach. So the question is, when you see an increase in something, what was the response? If you look at auto theft, Nathan said I had to come kicking and screaming. He said this is the last debate too. It's absolutely completely false. Portland police were doing some really fantastic and innovative work, and they partnered with OHSU to develop kind of an algorithm, really, but they're looking at different indicators, and they're tracking those, and they've developed, if you see a certain number of indicators, you should pull over that car. So they were doing some really great innovative work. When I saw a presentation from them and Officer Terrett on that to our office, I said, man, this is fantastic. How do we partner up and do this more? I went up and talked, and I remember it specifically to my first assistant, Jeff Howes. I was like, man, this is good stuff. He's like, we should do the old auto theft task force again. Let's bring that back. I went and talked to Commissioner Renee Gonzalez. This is all covered in the Oregonian. This is all public record. And we said, hey, because he was talking about muni courts. You guys probably remember one of his big platforms was muni courts. And that's not feasible for a lot of reasons. And so I talked to the commissioner. I said, hey, you wanted to do this, but how about we partner on a very specific area? And so the city and the county both threw in. I got Jessica Vega-Peterson to give us a prosecutor. I got the city to add an investigator. And then we were able to embed those with the great work that the Portland police officers were already doing. So it was that kind of approach that brought that together to make that happen. So, and now you look at auto theft rates.
I don't buy that. The commissioners actually the ones that wanted this, and it was the community calling for this. And
so Nathan, you weren't actually in these conversations at all.
Well,
you weren't a part of any of these conversations.
I have been a part of the
No,
conversations.
you have not.
So you and I disagree about that, because I certainly talked to the police officers, and I talk to folks out in the community, and I see this, how this played out. So I do see this, and
but you
quite
weren't
frankly,
actually in the room. You're never in the room, Nathan.
That's actually not correct. So
were you in? I mean, just to be clear, were you in any of the meetings about this specific thing that Mike's talking about?
If we're talking about, was I in the room when Portland Police came and brought the presentation? Yes, I was there for that. I saw that. Was I in the room when he had a specific conversation with a specific person? No, I was not. But I have talked to multiple folks who said that how the budget played out, and if we look at it, Mike proposed a budget that didn't include the auto theft task force. It was the county commissioners who came back and told managers and Mike, hey, we should really add this.
And you disagree with that?
Yeah, Nathan doesn't actually understand how budgeting processes work.
I actually do understand how they work, and you propose the things you want. And
see, that's what you don't understand. Budget conversations, frequently you propose a budget and you put down on paper these are things you want, and then you have dialogue with commissioners and conversations. I had multiple phone calls between Renee Gonzalez, between Jessica Vega-Peterson saying, hey, I think we can get a deal here. This is all covered in the Oregonian. And then a deal comes about where we get the city to agree, and they're going to throw in resources, the county to agree, and then we come back to the table and it becomes part of the budget.
So it seems like you two aren't going to come to middle ground on this narrative. If we called Renee Gonzalez and if we talked to Chair Vega Peterson, would you both be comfortable with, once we get out of those conversations, making, do you think that would clear it up? Do you think for both of you that would clear it up?
It could potentially, but I think you should ask, other individuals as well.
Well, give us a clue.
Okay, ask one of his managers, Kirsten Snowden. Ask her.
Okay.
That also wouldn't make any sense. First of all, Kirsten Snowden's throwing house parties for Nathan Vasquez as a candidate, so not exactly a neutral source in this.
And Vega Peterson endorses him, so how is that a neutral source as well?
But Jessica Vega Peterson is actually the decision-making person in this conversation. Kirsten Snowden wasn't a part of any of these conversations either.
Well, we've taken care of the question of who are your best endorsers, so let's keep moving.
Can I ask? So it seems like the crux of where you guys disagree right now is that you're saying that Mike's policies have either not helped break down crime or have worsened crime. Mike, you're saying your policies have nothing to do with crime rates. Can you name, maybe let's go one by one specific policy that you believe has created a spike in crime rate or has not helped bring it down, and then let's do just two of those examples, because it's very unclear to me which policies exactly you're referring to.
If you go back,
and if you'll let me interrupt, sorry, because I think it's a great question. I'm frankly less interested in hearing that you think he's a bad person, I got it, than I am interested in hearing what it is you would change specifically so that we can hear what your policies would be.
And just to be clear, I've never said Mike's a bad person. I disagree with his policies and his approach. I don't make personal attacks on him like he does with me, but I very much focus it on what his work has been and what it hasn't been. And so I want to be clear with that. Policies, when you look at some of the direct ones, if we were to list them out, when he campaigned very much on reducing prosecution, specifically misdemeanors and on nonviolent crimes. And so that was a policy that he put out in the world. Now, did he write it down and make it an office policy? No, he didn't.
But okay, so
But he
let's not talk
campaigned
about his campaign platform. Let's talk about what he actually did.
But it affected the office very directly, and we saw where he actually, that came out in...
Do we see that in data?
Yes. So our theft prosecution dropped down to 48% compared particularly to the other counties and things, and that was in misdemeanors. If you look at the data around misdemeanor prosecution, misdemeanors have dropped off the table. He sent a clear message to the community and to law enforcement. He was not interested in that, and they got that message loud and clear.
Okay, so let's, again, one by one. Mike, can you, we're just gonna go with the misdemeanor prosecutions right now. Can you respond to that?
Yeah. So like Nathan admits, there was no policy about misdemeanor prosecutions. What he's referring to is during the pandemic, when the courthouse was absolutely stalled, that our issuing rates for misdemeanors went down. That's true, it did. We throttled back on misdemeanors because caseloads were stacking up and we couldn't move them through the court process, and the community court shut down at the exact same time. So that was a decision that was made, and it was similar in the jails, similar across police officers also, throttling back how many misdemeanor arrests they were making, because we were all very scared of COVID and spreading COVID in our jails and with police officers and everybody else. Every one of the public safety agencies made those decisions during the pandemic, but there was never a written policy about let's not issue thefts. And what you see is the year that I took over, he's talking about, is the lowest year where our issuance rates were. I took over in August of that year. So, these were policies these were impacts in the data that happened for the first 2/3 of the year as well as when I took over. And then every year since then, our issuing rate has continued to increase up to where it is now, which is the highest it's been in the last 7 and 8 years.
So, okay, we've done misdemeanors a little bit. I'm sure we could drill into, I'm sure you guys could talk a lot more about this, but can you talk about another policy that you believe Mike formally or informally made that has hurt Portland?
So his efforts to reform bail under what he calls the no cash bail approach, where he pushed hard for SB 48, has hurt our community directly. So it has resulted in essentially a revolving door out the front of the jail. And we have seen countless examples of individuals who commit a crime, who are released and then go back out and commit multiple other crimes. This happens over and over and over. And this was something that he pushed on during not only his campaign, but then in his legislative approach. And then, despite all of these horrible loopholes it created, despite that, we've seen no efforts to actually change that or to improve that system, where people, not only are we talking about things like people going out smashing down, business windows and doors. We're talking about, individuals who are dealing fentanyl and with guns and involved in shootings. We're talking about individuals who have been who've been arrested and are pending prosecution on murder cases, who have other cases where they were released upon. These are all direct results of his approach on this issue, which is very misguided, and it shows a lack of actual prosecution experience, actually doing the work of what it means to hold someone in custody, how you make those decisions when you look at the safety of the community. And as much as he wants to push that off on other system partners or other folks, this was a major thrust impetus of his.
Mike, can you respond to that?
Yeah, so again, Nathan can't point you to a policy.
Well, I can.
Go ahead.
Like the cash bail system, we've grilled you on this before.
Yeah.
So let's talk clearly about your idea. I remember you helped sponsor the bill, as I recall. You certainly testified for it.
Oh, yes, I certainly testified for it. It was the result of 2 years of a governor's commission, which wrote a multi-page report. They went to multiple states. I wasn't even on that commission, and they made recommendations which were the foundation for Senate Bill 48. I supported those recommendations. One of the things that Nathan doesn't understand is that one of the reasons they made those recommendations is because they were fearful that our current system was unconstitutional. And we had seen in other states like Texas, where overnight a court finds a system unconstitutional and everybody ends up getting released the next day. So this work was preventative. That's why the governor put together a task force to study it. The report's public record. I testified in support of it. But let's talk about my actual policies, because that's what the question was. Since Senate Bill 48 has gone into effect, and since I've been the district attorney, our policies have been to use preventative detention when people are dangerous, and we can prove that in court to a judge. This wasn't something being used before I was the district attorney, very, very rarely. Now we've done it hundreds of times. It's become routine part of the way that we manage cases. Don't interrupt me yet. You can have your turn. We issue fail to appear citations now, because when people weren't showing up, we said, okay, well, how do we do something differently? And so now we're issuing fail to appear citations. I think Lucas covered that story. We started that back last fall. We've been working closely with the presiding judge. So the presiding judge issues what they call a presiding judge order. We have multiple times gone back to the presiding judge and asked the judge in the court to tighten up that order, to ratchet down the number of times that people can fail to appear before they're being held, to increase the types of crimes like fentanyl that they should be held for. And we're continuing to be in those discussions with the court and the presiding judge. Right now, the Chief Justice is reviewing her statewide Chief Justice order, they call it the CJO, which then kind of sets the floor for all the presiding judges across the state to do the PJOs. So right now we are again in an iterative process where we'll work with the courts and advocate for how they can tighten up the PJO.
So what's the current amount of time that people can fail to appear before they're
3.
Like 3? Mm-hmm. Why not 1?
That's where the presiding judge order got to, was 3. It used to be more than that. We got it tightened up so that now if you fail to appear 3 times that you will be held to see a judge.
Why not 1?
We can certainly advocate for 1. I mean, I think...
Well, you haven't, so why not 1?
Well, we advocated to get it down to 3. It's, we're one party in this.
Well, come on. There is a reason why it is not 1. What's the reason?
I think sometimes, people might fail to appear 1 time, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be held. But I mean, it's a policy discussion you can have, and you should look at it like crime
You don't think it's because many of the people that are being arrested are homeless and don't even know what day they're supposed to get in, or there's many different reasons it's difficult for them to get into the court? I mean, you've said this in the past. Why would you say it now?
No, it's certainly, that is definitely a reason why probably a lot of people fail to appear, is because they're disorganized and unable to keep track of these things.
I mean, they're busy selling fentanyl.
For the drug dealers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that's an area where we're going to be continuing to advocate that if you're dealing drugs, you ought to be held.
So when you say advocate, like what actual decision-making powers do you have in this? Any?
So the presiding judge order sets the floor for when somebody gets arrested and they're taken to the jail, there's not a judge there. Only judges can make release decisions. So the judge writes an order that guides the jail on who do we hold to see a judge the next day, and who do we release. So it's the PJO that is that first kind of place where that decision is being made. So when I say I'm advocating for it, that means I'm working with the presiding judge on what that presiding judge order should look like. Now the judge talks to people on our LIPSIC, talks to the sheriff, talks to defense attorneys, they all weigh in, and the presiding judge crafts the order. The other role that we play is then the next day, when a person is actually in front of the court, we can advocate as individual attorneys on cases.
So if you went to the presiding judge right now and said, we want to bring it down to one failure to appear, I mean, how powerful is you going to them and saying that? Would that be the difference?
I think we'd be taken very seriously. They would listen to the sheriff, they'd listen to defense attorneys, and the judge would come up with a decision on it. But yeah, we're an important stakeholder in that conversation. I don't get to make that decision, but we're certainly an important and influential stakeholder.
And you have not gone to the presiding judge?
I have not asked for one, no.
Okay.
So
All right.
Can I point out something here? When we talk about
Very quickly,
when we talk about preventative detention, it's a very small slice of the cases. What we're talking about is, repeated issues and times where people are getting out over and over and over on, nonviolent crimes that do have a huge impact on the community. So saying that preventative detention, it fully misses the mark of what the community is feeling.
what would you like to see instead?
I'd like to see a system put in place where actually a DA, the elected DA, goes down to the legislature and closes the loopholes when it comes to nonviolent crimes and people kind of continually getting out over and over again. You can.
Sorry, but I want you to be a little more specific about what that policy would be.
What that policy would be a specific amendment to SB 48, where it would include the ability to give judges, something similar to preventative detention when it comes to these nonviolent individuals that are repeatedly going out and harming the community over and over, which we're seeing, and we've seen no action by the elected DA to actually make a change in this area.
So it would give individual judges the ability to, if someone, what would it give the individual judges the ability
individual judges to, when making, so right now there are two kind of areas where you look at, traditionally under what we call the primary and the secondary release criteria. So those are, what's the likelihood that they're going to appear back in court? That's one. And then the other one is, what is the risk to the community? And that's where we're lacking. The judges are not able to have the tools effective enough. So it needs to be rewritten specifically to allow for that, because... So
broaden out the criteria by which judges can say, I'm concerned this person's going to go out and commit a crime, I'm going to hold them.
Yes.
So just to be clear, you're suggesting preventative detention for property crimes. That's what you want?
It's the idea is not preventative detention, but it is along those lines. The idea is that individuals that are causing harm repeatedly, so what we're seeing sometimes it takes 9 times. Do I think it should wait till 9 times before we decide, to actually step in? No, I don't. I believe we should be having, the judges should have tools to affect this when they're seeing individuals being arrested over and over.
So it sounds like your issues with the judges because they currently have that authority.
If they had it, they
So
act.
also I should say that the reason there isn't preventive detention for property crimes is because that's unconstitutional. Yet another area where my opponent doesn't even understand the law in some places.
Well, having been the only one that's actually practiced and worked in both the arraignment courts here within the last decade and worked on actual preventative detention cases, I do understand the law and I do understand the constitutionality. And this is where you need a leader who actually wants to push forward real solutions to help the community.
So I want to just put you on the record that you're saying that preventative detention for repeated property crimes would be constitutional.
I think that we would have to work to make sure the language got there, but yes.
Okay, and you're saying it's not?
That's absolutely not.
We'll go check the law.
Yeah,
so
it's an easy one.
I'd like to ask Nathan, what's your greatest failure, and how did you learn from it?
My greatest failure?
Professionally, I'm not really interested in
No, I understand your question. I would say I had a child abuse case that resulted in a not guilty. That I think of that case often because as a young man who was brutally beaten by his father. And, it was one where I looked at that and I carefully evaluated, because there were a lot of downstream consequences for that young man afterwards. And, I always think back to that case, and I think about how I could have done jury selection better. Because particularly the jurors, they fully believed that the father had horribly beaten the son, but decided that because he loved him, that was a reason to find him not guilty. I think better voir dire, it always is something that, for me, my guiding principle is always, how do I best serve the community and victims? And it caused me to evaluate and carefully look at how I do those cases and all the cases moving forward, to make sure that I'm looking at all the different ways in which I can do that.
Thank you. Same question.
For me, it's over this past term, it's really been communication. Communication, particularly with the public. There's been so much misinformation rampant from right when I first started about not prosecuting cases, and some of that is the way that I communicated, and I needed to do a better job communicating to the public what was actually happening. I think it was suggested to me a lot of times doing more press conferences, doing more availability. I think later on in my term, I started to do more availability with the press, but I think, that's a mistake that, maybe just a learning mistake for me. But I think the narrative really has gotten out of control. And of course, there are opportunists that have taken advantage of that. Like the People for Portland campaign and folks like that. But, ultimately at the end of the day, it was my failure to get the message out of the work that was being done, and that we were doing the things that this community wants us to do. I think now we're in campaign season, so I talk about it all the time, but it really needs to be a year-round campaign.
So let me ask you, if you don't mind, I want to follow up on that. I don't want to turn that into a gotcha question. I understand that that's your answer. I am curious, other than communicating with the public better about your successes, what will you do differently if we send you back for another 4 years?
Yeah, not even just about the successes, to be clear.
Or the failures, but other than communicating differently, are you going to do anything differently in the next 4 years, or?
Well, I think this is what is so important about who you choose to be the leader. I could not have predicted. When I ran in 2019, we didn't have a pandemic, we didn't have George Floyd, we didn't have any of these issues, right? And then I win. And now we're suddenly facing gun violence, we're suddenly facing catalytic converter theft, auto theft, retail theft, all these things that are spiking. And so the question is, what do you do in response to those things? And for each of those things, we have come up with a response, and we've seen an effect, and we've seen positive outcomes of those things. I think what's important for a leader, you can't predict what the future challenges are going to be, but I've shown that I'm adept at being able to meet the challenge that we're actually facing, work on it collaboratively with people, sometimes even people who I'm not necessarily philosophically aligned with. Like, for example, Renee Gonzalez and I are not completely philosophically aligned, but we were able to work together for the betterment of the community. I've been able to do that over and over and over again. So as I continue into my next term, we're seeing good successes in some of these areas. I want to build out what we've been doing in retail theft. I want to build out more employee rights cases around wage theft. We're working with unions on that. That's an area that we need to continue to do and see further growth. So that's an area. I want to do better and do a lot more work on domestic violence cases. We've just recently received a national partnership with the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys to launch a program called Survivor-Centered Diversion. I want to get that off the ground and see that come to fruition, so that we're working with particularly usually women who are victims of domestic violence to actually deal with those issues instead of just pushing them through the criminal system.
Can I go back to your failure real quick? I mean, Nathan just opined on a time when he may have failed to convict a child abuser. And you gave us, I didn't communicate my office's priorities or whatever, but can you give us something just a little bit meatier, that maybe a little bit more reflection about a time when you really feel like maybe you morally failed, or you failed in your job duty, not just a communication error?
When I failed, I think obviously some of the challenges that we faced internally in the office, looking at we've been doing the equity surveys and things like that, and we've seen that there are specific areas of people that don't feel like they've been, heard in the office, and they want to see more attention paid to what their concerns are. I think that's an area where I wouldn't say we've necessarily failed, because we're starting on that work, but it's a real challenge point for us to
But
work on.
where did you fail in that though? I'm just, it's all feeling a little external right now.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we clearly are not getting the results that I would hope to get, but there hasn't been a thing that is like driven that failure. Specifically a decision. I think one of the ones, so our victim advocate program, for example, we lost a victim advocate, and it was an area where I had not paid much attention from when I got started. I was working on thing to thing, and I just hadn't put really any effort or attention to the victim advocate program. And we lost a victim advocate, and she wrote a letter about her concerns. And so I guess that's an area where I could have done something more specific and paid attention to that. Since then, I mean, it was kind of, for me, a wake-up call. She said, here are my concerns. We brought in outside consultants to look at that program, and now I think we're heading in the right direction. But it was an area that I hadn't done anything with, I think 1 to 2 years into my tenure.
Okay. Nathan? Bury this up a little bit. Tell us something that Mike has done in office that you agree with, that you like.
Something that Mike has done, there has been work with the JIU. I like the concept of the JIU, and I like the idea.
Sorry, what is that?
Oh, so thank you for that. It's the too heavy in acronyms. Justice Integrity Unit. I'm a firm believer in this program. I think that it's lacked the guidance it needs, and there's been some real issues in how it's been rolled out. But the overall concept is something that I appreciate, and I want to see carried forward in a kind of more efficient, effective manner. Sadly, I hear that it's backlogged tremendously right now. There's been massive issues with personnel with that throughout the time that's been there. I mean, there was the disastrous hire of Ernie Warren that flamed out immediately. But that concept I really I believe in, because I firmly believe that if someone's paid their debt to society, and however that played out, we want to do things to make sure that they are productive and healthy. But at the same time, this is an area again where I really question the commitment to victims in this area, and I think that's been lacking greatly, because I think if you want to talk about justice integrity, you also, when you're making these extremely critical decisions, you have to be very focused on victims and making sure that their voice is heard and represented in this process.
You're his manager. Can you tell us something he's done that you agree with and that you're proud of him?
Yeah. I remember when I first took over as DA, and Nathan, I invited all the folks to come over to my house in the backyard before I was actually in office, just to meet people, get to talk to them. And we had a great conversation about strategic prosecution and the use of data and how we could prioritize focusing on individuals who are creating a disproportionate amount of harm to hold them accountable, and then that way have a bigger outsized effect on the crime that the community is facing. I think it's a good approach. That's why we've invested heavily in his unit and grown it substantially. It's the unit that's grown the most since I've been the district attorney. So I think that's a good approach. It's something that I've seen in other sectors work really well. When I was at the CJC, we started the impacts grants, which were the same idea. The high systems utilizers, focusing on those folks. If you focus on them, you can have the most cost savings to the medical system. Same idea on the prosecution side.
Mike, how many people do you manage right now?
Like in the agency, or do I manage?
Let's do both.
Yeah, I think there's around 260 people in the agency right now. I have an executive team of, I think we're at 13.
Okay.
So those are my kind of directs.
Nathan, do you have management experience?
Yes, I do.
And what can you tell us about that?
I manage attorneys that are in my unit.
How many?
Right now, in the unit there are 12. I would put that number closer to 10 because I have a co-supervisor now that, Miss Muriel Moda, who, amazing attorney that I worked hard to, help support in her journey to get promoted. She's a fantastic co-supervisor.
We be clear, he doesn't actually manage attorneys. He's a supervisor in that he works with them, but he doesn't have hiring, firing, disciplinary, any of those kinds of things which actually come with management.
Is that right? You don't have those powers?
That's correct. I write employee reviews. I help assign their cases. I kind of do the day-to-day training. I do that. Whether you want to call it supervisor or management, that's what it is. But
no disciplinary function because he's in the same union as the people that he is supervising, so there'd be conflict of interest there.
Yeah, so I didn't actually say I did any of that.
Right, but a big part of management is actually all of those duties.
Yeah, I know. We've seen the problems with your management, so, thanks, but.
So, drugs are criminalized again. What's your strategy for prosecuting possession cases or directing people into treatment? I want to hear a strategy, and I'll have the same question for you in a second.
Yeah, this was a big focus for me during the legislative session. We worked closely with lawmakers to write House Bill 4002. And so it kind of has 4 components. Step 1 is deflection. And so right now, that's where the conversations are. In fact, I was talking to Portland Police yesterday about, okay, what is deflection going to look like for Portland Police? And it needs to look different for Portland as it does for Gresham, because Gresham officers aren't going to drive someone down to Portland to be able to deflect. So we have to come up with solutions that work for MCSO, GPD, and PPD. So that's where the conversation is on the deflection piece. But I think what we're talking about is a place where police officers, when they interact with somebody, can say, look, you're not allowed to possess these drugs. And so we have some options here. It can either be, I can arrest you and take you to jail, or I can take you to this drop-off site. It could also look like calling somebody to the police officer on the streets. Like when I was doing the ride-along with the bike officers, clearly they can't transport somebody to jail without calling for another car. So it could also be like what they're doing with the BHRC and having the health workers come to them and meet them to do the connection. But either way, it's a handoff for police officers with the individual. And if that contact happens and the person has a meaningful interaction with those individuals, then the case can be deflected, meaning that there won't be prosecution, there won't be an arrest or anything else like that. If that doesn't work, if they don't engage, if they're not interested in that, then we do door number 2, which is the arrest. You would take the individual to jail. They would be booked in the jail. Whether or not they would be held, of course, is up to the sheriff and the presiding judge order. Probably likely not going to happen. So then they would be told to come back into court. But then the law writes into it what's called conditional discharge. And conditional discharge, again, gives the person an opportunity on pretrial release to engage in treatment. And if the person says, yeah, now I'm ready to go to treatment, we will allow them to do that sort of an interaction, whatever that ends up looking like for the individual. If they engage, then we dismiss the case. Then there is no prosecution. If they don't want to take advantage of conditional discharge, then there's a prosecution, there's a conviction, they go on formal probation. They'll have a probation officer that's being paid for by the state. And then again, the probation officer will tell them that they have to engage in treatment. And as long as they do that, they will be, they'll successfully complete their probation. And we built into the statute automatic expungement. So for the first time in Oregon's history, we'll now have automatic expungement. Within 3 years, that will be automatically expunged no matter what. So if that's successful, great, they go on their way, they get their expungement in 3 years. Even if that is unsuccessful, the probation officer says, sorry, I can't work with you, you keep messing up, we should revoke. The judge, you should revoke this individual's probation. They can be sentenced up to 180 days in jail, minus any credit for times that they've already served. And though we built into the statute that they can be released to treatment and serve out the rest of their jail sentence in a treatment setting. So at every stage of one of these interactions, the whole point is to connect people with those treatment services.
Nathan, you're deeply sighing over there. Do you want to?
No. I think that's a fine recitation of what the amendment says. I certainly was, out front on this long before Mike decided that maybe it'd be a good idea to change up Measure 110. I put out a 6-point plan that covered a lot of the topics that are in this. And, yes, I'm a firm believer and actually that we need to be taking a massively different direction than where we are. And it's one of the, I think, key failings that when we talk about what we've seen under Mike Schmidt is that this wasn't like a crisis that all of a sudden crept up on us in 2024 or late 2023. Like, this is early on, this has been a massive issue. I mean, in 2022, we saw over 500 overdose deaths in Multnomah County.
Stipulated. What's your strategy for prosecuting possession cases and directing people into treatment?
My strategy will be very much a hands-on, working with officers and also with the community providers to do that first point of intervention, so that there is a combination between those two to really meet what are the expectations of deflection. You actually have to build out the very particular partnerships there to see that work, because there is a genuine opportunity at that meeting point. But here's the problem. Individuals that are struggling, particularly with fentanyl use and in that substance abuse disorder, is that they get to a point where they are back to drug-seeking behavior after about 45 minutes. And so you need to have a kind of more robust program out there, and that will be the first point, is to build that out as thoroughly as I can on that front end, because that's where we're going to see a lot of struggles.
What does it mean to build out that? I mean, it's just nebulous. What does that mean?
Yeah, it means you have, right now we're seeing some of the kind of, I would call, the very beginnings of this with the bike officers, which I'm glad that Mike finally decided on the eve of the election to actually go out and see what they do. But what I've been seeing them do for years is, and then here more recently, is they partner with folks. And what they do is they have service providers come out to the scene and then start to deal with an individual who's struggling. Now, the bike officers are great, but they're a very small slice of what's happening in the county, because as we saw with that dashboard that was rolled out, this is diffused throughout the county. And if we don't build this out beyond just a very narrow view of the bike officers, this has to be in every precinct, every corner, if we're going to actually affect this deflection piece. So that is going to be a massive undertaking, and it's not as simple as, hey, I went out with the bike officers one time and they do this program. This has to be a robust program where you're dealing with individual neighborhoods, individual neighborhood treatment providers, and really looking for opportunities. Because what we see is, if you take individuals and we're displacing them from where they are, we see low rates where they don't have the same success rate. So we need to have that really diffuse countywide program in that area.
Can you point me to a place where you've demonstrated independence from your backers or your base? And in particular, I'd be delighted to hear a place where you've demonstrated independence from public safety unions.
Independence. Sure. I mean, I don't necessarily think that most of those folks are big on the Justice Integrity Unit. I have said repeatedly that I am supportive of restorative justice. I think there are some areas to change there, but that's again not something that I would say is really wildly popular among the unions. I think the MCGRP program is another one that I've been very supportive of, and that is... Unpack that acronym for us. I know, that's going to be a tough one. It's, I'm sorry, it's the Multnomah County MC, Criminal Justice Reinvestment Program. Whew. Okay, so what that one is designed is, how do we do a diversion out of prison for a lot of nonviolent crimes? That's one that I can tell you a lot of, law enforcement, they like to cite that there's high recidivism, there's a lot of issues there. I believe that using the tools within that to really carefully look at and identify individuals where there's opportunities to deliver treatment, whether that's drug addiction or mental health, I believe that we need to be doing that to make sure that we're looking at long-term, how do we get people out of the criminal justice system. So those are all areas I would point you to.
Great. Same question, but probably not public safety unions. Can you definitely Find us a place where you've demonstrated independence from your backers or your base.
Yeah. First of all, I'll just say that was a lot of word salad about nothing. But he's talking about programs that have existed for 15 years in Multnomah County that he still supports. So that's a real going out on a ledge. The easiest example is House Bill 4002. I mean, you know, I went to my supporters, a lot of the community-based organizations that have endorsed me, and I said, we need to do this. We need to make this change, and I supported and testified in favor of it, and that was challenging.
Have you had a conversation with anybody at the Drug Policy Alliance about supporting 4002?
Yeah, we've had that conversation.
How'd that go?
It was not an easy conversation, but I said when we had the conversation, I was like, hey, look, I have to do what I think is right for the community. And so that's...
Not because the poll showed that it was 70% of the population was looking to actually overturn ballot measure 110?
Because I did. We were working on this since
August. Like, philosophically, do you personally think it's the right? Like, I guess that's what I'm confused about. Is like, have you changed your mind deep down on whether Measure 110 was the right strategy, or was this a political move?
No, I think that I still believe that decriminalization can work. I think it can. I think that it did not work here. I think that the way that it was implemented and at the time and the challenges that we faced with fentanyl coming onto our streets at the same time and during a pandemic, like, it didn't work. And so that's why I supported 4002, because I don't think that it was working. But that's also why I became part of the negotiations and conversations around 4002. It's not where it was started and what was proposed by, even when Nathan testified the one time he showed up at a hearing, it didn't end up in those places. We got automated expungement into it. We got a unclassified misdemeanor of 180 days. So we're very much part of the conversation of how that will work. And I actually am very optimistic that what House Bill 4002, if we can nail the landing on this, that could end up being a model for the country. I really believe that.
Lucas, further questions? We're running out of time, and I'd love to have you have a chance to ask anything on your list.
Yeah, should we have more people in jail, less people in jail? How big should our jail be? I'll start.
I don't think that our jail's the wrong size. We have more beds than we use, so it's about funding, how much the jail can use the beds that we have. I know that the sheriff has trouble with recruitment, and so there's, personnel issues in terms of staffing the jail that make things challenging. But we certainly don't need to build another jail. I would like to see more people held at least to show up the next day to see a judge. And so instead of just being released right at the jailhouse door the time that they're arrested, but actually have to see a judge the next day. I think that's an improvement that we can make that wouldn't overburden our jail capacity.
So just real fast, so you're saying you want more people held in jail. How are you going to do that given all the issues you just described with staffing?
Yeah, I mean, we have, I'm not in charge of the sheriff's staffing, so she should talk about that, but my understanding is that she doesn't have the staffing that she needs. And so, but we have space in order to hold people for a day to see a judge the next day.
So we're clear on the numbers. So right now, the brick and mortar is about 1,600 jail beds. That's what we've built out. The county commissioners have funded about 1,100 beds. We are housing roughly between 800 to 900, depending on obviously daytime. Do I believe that we should be holding more people? Yes, because I see the revolving door that quite frankly, Mike Schmidt helped put forward. And I see a lot of people on the streets that are in crisis because of a combination of mental health or drug addiction. They're out, unfortunately, committing crimes because they're just left to be in this crisis situation, and it grows and grows to this really violent state. I would love to see more improvement in what we call the treatment readiness storms. So we have the capacity, the space. We should be using that space to actually build out programs where we can connect people to treatment better. And that treatment readiness can be both drug addiction, but also the mental health component. And so, do I think we need to build another jail? No, I don't. Do I think we need to better fund the sheriff's office? Yes, I do. And I would advocate for that. And I would advocate also the biggesse piece, which we didn't talk a lot about, is funding the pre-trial supervision services. So that's like closed street supervision and what we call PRS, pre-trial supervision. And so those programs need better funding, because if we're going to have people out of custody, it shouldn't be they have a caseload of, that's overwhelming and they can't actually check on that to make sure that the people are complying. So those are the areas that I would focus on.
Okay, yeah, do you have anything else?
I don't, Sophie.
Can we do the one question for each other?
I have Mark on mute. You'll live.
Okay.
Do you want
Quick?
to?
Yeah.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so can you each ask your opponent one question that you're curious about, and please direct the question at that person.
And
keep
we
it
always
short.
mention this, but make it a question they can actually answer.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you go first.
Okay. So Nathan, you're known as a person who, is a big gun person. One of your major supporters is Betsy Johnson, who has a flawless rating with the NRA. When asked questions about gun control and legislation in previous debates, you've dodged the questions. My question for you is, did you vote for ballot measure 114? Yes or no, and then why or why not?
Okay, first, I'm not a big gun person. I am very knowledgeable about firearms because I'm a prosecutor and I deal with a lot of gun violence. It's actually just a key component of doing the actual real work. I've never dodged questions in debate. And yes, Betsy Johnson does support me, so do many other progressives and kind of the whole spectrum of folks. I don't agree with her on everything. I don't agree with her approach on the NRA. I'm not a member of the NRA, not taking money from them, and I do believe in sensible gun control. The only reason I didn't support ballot measure 114, so the answer is no, I didn't vote for it, is because it was written in a hodgepodge way, which sadly with ballot measures creates this ineffective process we see right now with it, which is instead of actually getting some progress forward, it's all tangled up in the courts. What I would prefer is the legislature actually act and work and do the things that we expect our state legislatures to do. Things like ban high capacity magazines. I support that. I do support sensible gun control. And so it is, in my perspective, important that we have our state legislature actually stepping into this arena. I mean, right now they're dominated by the Democratic Party, and they should be able to pass some sensible gun control.
So you support the premise of Measure 114?
Yes, many of the premises in there.
What do you not support about it?
The way that it was written and the way it's tied up in the courts right now.
What about the provisions, like specific provisions though, that actually relate to gun control?
I'd have to see the bill in front of me, but I mean, certainly the high capacity magazine component. I am, a firm believer in background checks.
So you support the high capacity, or didn't support the high capacity? Sorry,
I do support that.
Okay, yeah.
In the measure 114 says magazines over 10. Is that what you mean by high capacity?
Yeah.
I'm just out of curiosity, and then you're going to get to ask him a question. So, how many guns do you own?
I think I'm at 3. So I have a handgun, because I was a concealed weapons handgun holder, and I hunt, so I have a shotgun and a rifle.
What's the handgun?
It is a 9mm.
Mm-hmm. What make?
It is an HK.
You got any guns?
I don't.
Okay. Question for your opponent.
Yeah, Mike, you've kind of danced around this issue quite a bit, but could you tell us what were the last 3 trials and what type of cases were they that you did, and when were they? So when were those, and then how many total cases have you actually taken to jury trial?
Last 3 trials for me, it would have been before 2013, because that's when I left the office. They would have been property crimes trials. I don't know specifically what my last 3 jury trials were. I had one that involved, also I'll just say a couple memorable ones. I mean, I can't swear that they were my last ones, but I had one where some individuals went into an AT&T and ripped iPhones off the walls, and then ran out, and they were chased by a man who unloaded his weapon at the youths who stole the phones and hit the car, and it was actually the ballistics in the car that allowed us to track down who eventually it was that stole the phones. It was a pretty interesting case. So that was one. I mean, I did a lot of stolen cars, metal theft. I did a lot of metal theft cases, identity theft. I remember a trial where we did forged trip tags on a car. You know, you can write out with a Sharpie and make it look like it's a different triptych number. So yeah, it would have been before 2013, and they would have been property crimes.
About how many total jury trials would you say you've done? Jury ones.
I never kept track, but I mean, certainly in the dozens, probably.
Wait a minute, we do jury evals, so we keep track of all those, so we would know exactly how many we did or didn't do.
Yeah, so I never kept track of my jury trials, but I don't know. I mean, in the dozens.
Okay.
We end these interviews with what we call our fun question.
Okay.
If there were to be a movie made about your life, Mike, who would you have as the actor who plays you?
That's a good question. Boy, I want someone really cool and like tough, but it really is probably more like Ashton Kutcher.
Nathan?
You know, it would probably be Benicio del Toro, just because I love his look, I love his delivery, I love the passion he brings. Not necessarily saying his personal background or anything like that, but just him as an actor.
Great actor. Thank you to both of you.